Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to be talking about INFJs and the notion of the calling, having a calling, a vocation in life. Before I move on to our topic, let me remind you that in relation to this concept of calling, of vocation, and many other themes that are pertinent to the INFJ, I've written a book, The Ecstatic Soul, available in ebook and paperback formats, or all the links are the description box down below. It's less than $10. All Amazon websites to all the different countries, most in-depth study of the INFJ ever conducted. Reviews are really good, sales are good. You help me, I help you. Consider, having a look. And if you have any questions, just shoot. So, INFJs have a calling. It's something that we hear often in the literature and articles. Most often we encounter it in the form of a claim, the claim being more or less something like this, that INFJs by nature, somewhat like INTJs, are able to predict the future, are able to have a vision, and that their destiny, therefore, is to ensure that their vision of the future is made to take place in the best possible circumstances. And you can associate a lot of historical figures with this particular type of INFJs. Historical figures, fictional figures. There's always this idea of INFJs being visionaries. There's this idea that there's something in INFJs that transcends the individual, essentially. And that's much more the case, in fact, than in the case of the INTJ, where the visionary element is present, but there is a much more of a focus on the individual. It seems as if the future of the complete INFJ, maybe we could talk about completeness in this case. The complete INFJ is an INFJ whose future is somehow bound up with the future of humanity as a whole and influences it. And so, in a paradoxical sense, the purest example of individual INFJ genius is never to be understood solely in terms of that particular INFJ, but in terms of the group of people, the community, or humanity as a whole, and how they are transformed through it. So you can see that in a lot of INFJ literature, but like I said, historical figures, religious figures, there are so many cases: Jesus Christ, the Buddha, the Prophet Muhammad. So you have in Christianity, in Islam, in Buddhism, you have so many instances of these INFJ individuals whose genius is expressed through visions, certainly, but the import of the vision is not just their content. It is how the content has been able to reshape the future of communities that have been impacted by it. And I think that the problem is the following. On the one hand, you have an account which is seems on the surface to be a little bit mythological, insofar as most of us humble INFJs, humble people, are not as special as Jesus. We're not as special as the Prophet Muhammad. We are not as special as the Buddha. We're far less special. We're just individual people trying to carve out a space for ourselves in the world. And yet, on the other hand, there seems to be undeniably some truth in those descriptions. In other words, we can tell on the one hand that some of those descriptions look a bit like horoscopes in the sense that they're sufficiently positive, complimentary, and vague enough to be applicable to us and to make us feel good about ourselves. But they can't make us feel too good about ourselves because we're always aware of the fact that we're failing these examples. We're fallible, whereas these examples seem almost infallible, almost, like I said, mythical. Even though these individuals existed, they're as if the most pure examples of INFJs that we can try to aim towards. We can try to aim to be like Jesus, or to be like Muhammad, or to be like the Buddha. But at the same time, when your guide, when the person, the figure that you're trying to emulate is so enormous, like this massive mountain, it can be almost a dispiriting experience to try to think of ourselves in those terms. We might even think that we don't deserve to think about ourselves in those terms. We're just normal human beings like everybody else. And so there's this disconnect between the credibility of those explanations we find online regarding the visions and the future and destinies of INFJs, and their evident lack of applicability to men and women of all walks of life that associate with this type, and are maybe for the most part, once they're done with the horoscopic type descriptions, are looking for more practical advice, more concrete explanations that they can relate to, instead of having to rely on these grandiose comparisons or vast arsenals of metaphors. So I think that this is a good way of isolating the problem. Now, what I do in this book, and I do this really quite a lot, especially in chapters 1 to 4, there are quite a few developments about what it means for an INFJ to have a calling, a destiny, a vocation. Not in the terms usually described in those articles in the literature we see online, or in the very inflated descriptions of introverted intuition, for example, as prophetic, seer-like, and so on and so forth. I try to just bring it down to just how the INFJ consciousness is articulated with reference to the cognitive functions, the particular quality that consciousness has, and how that is something experienced by all INFJs, regardless of different subtypes, different types of INFJ, different levels of intelligence, station in life, or anything like that, for the simple reason that it's an existential condition. So insofar as you exist and your consciousness or your psychical makeup is NIFETISE, you're going to have this existential condition that you have to deal with. At least this is the claim I make in the book. And from this perspective, the notion of a calling is something that can be understood in a more straightforward and less veiled and cryptic way, and at the same time has the liberating force that would not be available to the more grandiose descriptions, because at least it sort of makes that explanation concrete and practical for any INFJ, and not for the super gifted or super historically significant INFJs. So basically, what do I try to argue in the book? I try to argue the following. I try to make the point that INFJs are NI-dominant users. They're also TI users in their tertiary position, and they're FE auxiliary. Implication being SE is inferior. Now, INFJs have a lot of intuitions. They're not necessarily intuitions about what the future is going to be like, but they're certainly intuitions that qualify as intuitions because they cannot be completely explained by reference to a system of inference that can be made transparent for all to see, because SE is inferior, so the gathering function is not conscious, or mostly not conscious. In other words, INFJs are often not able to explain why they know certain things or why they can figure out certain things. The downside of it is some people will not take them seriously because they will demand more evidence, ability to provide a justification which they cannot provide. The advantage is, because those intuitions don't follow the traditional inference systems that people use in a conscious manner, they'll be able to pick up things that other people don't pick up. And so their thought can be very original and indeed define the way in which the future is going to be directed. Not because they predict what the future is going to be like, but rather because they can provide the future with interesting content to appropriate in contrast to the present. So they contribute to a different future by supplying the possible content of that future, and that's where they can make a big difference. Now, because of their inability to clarify the inferences that led to their intuitions, and that makes those intuitions rather than logical conclusions, for example, INFJs will often experience difficulty sharing those insights because they're afraid that people will castigate them as not making sense, as being cryptic for the sake of it, as being unintelligible. INFJs are quite wary of that, partly because their desire for harmony via FE is something that they really treasure. So they'll often be willing to forsake their intuitions via various tactics. Like I said before in many videos, dismissiveness and evasiveness being the two main ones. And essentially that leads to existential dissatisfaction, because you're making peace with yourself by surrendering a part of yourself, and that may earn you the possibility of feeling like you're socially accepted, but a part of you will always feel like you're not living to your fullest potential. You're not being what I called a complete INFJ. And that's a tough verdict to deliver, but that's the verdict that I deliver in the book. Now, any INFJ comes forward say I'm a complete INFJ is kind of lying in a sense, because it's this process of coming to terms with the contents of your intuition and clarifying them is something that is a lifelong process and has to be accomplished in collaboration with other people and enlisting other people as part of a project to clarify what those contents are. And because INFJs use FE, they have no other option than to engage FETI to discuss with other people. So basically the idea is to pull other people in who believe that you have something worthwhile to say, that see that there's something highly original, something prescient that you're saying. And the point of this collaborative project is to come to a stage where those insights are clarified and may define future activities for your community or for the world if you're Jesus Christ, or if you're a Muhammad or a Buddha. And what's really interesting is that in the process of articulating this collaboration, the INFJ is the most aware that they're engaging in this collaboration. They're the ones who are directing the collaboration in a sense. And this is partly also why they can have the greatest amount of influence over the products of the collaboration, not just because they are the ones who supplied most of the content, but also because they're directing the collaboration that's articulated around it. And because this is an infinite process and the INFJ is never finished refining the insights of their NI, that very activity, that very open-ended kind of process is the calling itself, is the vocation, which is why I often refer in the book I refer to prescience as a vocation. So instead of using the word vision and destiny, which are difficult to apply to a concrete life and seem to apply more to those mythological figures I've been talking about, prescience and vocation, or prescience and calling, are much more accessible, because prescience is just a state where you feel like you just know something that you can't really explain why you know it. It doesn't have to be something absolutely monumental. It can be something quite simple about a situation where your friends are talking and you figure something out that you probably shouldn't know on the basis of what you think you've collected as information, and yet you feel like you know it. That's prescience. Anybody can relate to it in a concrete way. You don't have to compare yourself to a prophet of the Bible or any other text to agree on this. And at the same time, if you take that prescience and make it something that you always want to try to clarify as much as possible by enlisting other people in this project, again, this can be done at a very simple level. It just means that when you have friends, like, it doesn't have to be a massive community, but just your friends, to open up to them about that, to talk to them about what you're interested in and what you feel like you've come up with, and to enlist them in this way. It can only be just a group of friends. It doesn't matter if it's a massive thing. It's not a lot of everybody to want to change the entire world, and nor should it be. And in this way, the collaboration around the insights of prescience turns into this open-ended calling, this vocation. Essentially, you dedicate your life to making sense of what your intuition is telling you, and in the process, because you're coordinating this with a lot of other people, you're engaging in a social activity and you're impacting the lives of other people, of the community. And that can be done just basically anywhere where you're interacting with people. It can be done in subtle ways. It can be done with your friends, can be done with your colleagues, can be done with your relatives. And it can be done with a certain kind of peace of mind, and by just being a person who's functioning normally in the world anyway, just to have that idea of a calling that is nothing more complicated than knowing that your NI intuitions stand in need of redemption and that you need others to do that, and that in the process, you're influenced by it, others are influenced by it, the future is reshaped by it. So that's about it for my explanation of the INFJ and the notion of the calling. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys, and drop me a like if you would be so kind. Consider subscribing. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.